Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We shall now commence the second and final panel discussion of the forum. This panel discussion is titled The Next Phase of Collaboration. The session is moderated by Dr. Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead, Trade and Economics at ISAS. Joining Dr. Palit on the panel are Professor Mohan S. Kankanhalli, Deputy Executive Chairman, AI Singapore, and Provost Chair Professor of Computer Science at NUS, Mr. Guruprakash Pai, Chief Delivery Officer at Infosys Compaz, Mr. Marcus Lim, Co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Ecosofft, Ms. Tulika Raj, Chief Executive Officer and Co-founder SunGreen H2, Mr. N Muthukumar, Group Chief Financial Officer, Olam Group Ltd, and Mr. Harsh Rajpal, Founding Partner, Capital Code. I will now hand over the session to Dr. Palit.
Thank you so much, Said, and let me join my panelists and the Institute of South Asian Studies in welcoming you to the second session of today's discussions. We have had a very fruitful engagement in the past session, and it's quite remarkable that we are having this conversation on a day when the Indian Prime Minister is visiting Singapore. Mind you, we had no knowledge of it when we planned this out, so it's not a deliberate design on our part, but it's just that it happens to achieve that much of Asian significance. This particular panel will build up on what was discussed in the first session, and there are three specific areas which we feel from the perspective of the next phase of India-Singapore relations that are going to be particularly significant. And the first of these is digitalization and artificial intelligence. The second is environmental sustainability, which also includes initiatives for decarbonization and encouraging the growth and application of green hydrogen. And finally, cooperation in enhancing food security. And since we believe all these three are going to be, in some respects, among the defining areas of future collaboration between India and Singapore, not just between the two of them as countries, but also between their respective businesses, institutions, and perhaps even among people or individuals at some level. What we are going to explore in this particular session is what has been achieved to some extent in these areas till now, and what are going to be the areas where further synergies exist and can be exploited. We have an extremely experienced, rich, diverse, and very seasoned group of panelists over here, 6 of them, and I will not take too much time in bringing them on board. So we will first have all the speakers listed on the panel speaking out here today, and then we will open up to the question and answers session. We will also have interjections among the panelists if they want to come back and seek for some clarifications on what they have spoken on. So let me then start off the discussions by inviting Professor Mohan Kankanhalli, Deputy Executive Chairman, AI Singapore, and Provost's Chair Professor of Computer Science, NUS, and also on the Management Board of the Institute of South Asian Studies. Mohan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Amitendu. I'm going to start off this whole conversation with a specific example. I thought that would kind of be a good anchor later on for having a discussion. And I'm going to talk about a very specific thing. So if you notice in the slide, I have two things which I'm very heavily involved with: the NUS AI Institute as well as AI Singapore. And what I'm going to talk today is about AI Singapore. Now, since November 2022, I think AI has become common on the street thanks to ChatGPT and large language models. So like many other countries in the world, I think Singapore we've made a very strategic decision that we are going to build a sovereign model. That is a model which is developed in Singapore, for the use. And I think the reasons are many. I think one of the things is that you don't want to rely on certain foreign corporations for all your models who have the ability to turn it off anytime. So in particular, I'm going to talk about Sea Lion is the LLM which we built, which is, I've given kind of the QR code, so if you're really interested, you can actually download the model because it's an open source model. And it's a family of models. And what is unique about Sea Lion is that our focus in terms of the language abilities is ASEAN languages. So it basically, you can interact with Sea Lion in any of the ASEAN languages. I just want to kind of briefly introduce its capabilities. In fact, what we have done is we have built a large language model which can work in ASEAN languages and also in English and Mandarin, which is one of the languages used here. Now, it is not the best model in English, but it's pretty good. Okay, so it's not the best large language model in Mandarin, but it's pretty good. But as far as ASEAN language capabilities goes, it's the best model available in the world today. Okay, and then its performance is kind of varying across different ASEAN languages, of course this is kind of work in progress. So as we go along, we are releasing new models. In particular, one of the languages in ASEAN and particularly in Singapore and Malaysia is Tamil. So this LLM actually is quite proficient in Tamil. And these are some of the standard benchmarks which are used around the world for comparing large language models, which is in language understanding, translation, summarization, question answering. So in each of the one, we are actually number 1 or number 2. Now, one of the key things other than the model architecture and how do you train them, and there's all this very technical sophistication out there. One of the key things of building large language models is actually data. So just to give you an example, this is unfortunately I don't speak or read Tamil, so I hope it is good. This was an example given by my colleagues at AI Singapore. It apparently is pretty good, and it's actually improving with time. And one of the things which is very important in building large language model is data. And in fact, the data determines how good your model is, other than the fact that you understand how to build these models and how to kind of fine-tune it, how do you put in guardrails because it doesn't answer harmful things or dangerous things. So we have actually used data from the local news, as well as we have collaborated with Indian institutions for this. So that is kind of the anchor point which I'm trying to deal with. So basically, we have actually worked with parties in India to get this data for training our model, and more importantly, to work with them and to share. I mean, a lot of us, actually professors at NUS, we have individual collaboration with people, professors in Indian institutions, and we have PhD students and all that kind of things. But this is an institutional collaboration in order to build better models. And I'll list some of our Tamil language partners in India. And these are some of the most active institutions. Now you may ask that what is in it for them? Actually, this is they share their data with us, and we actually train the model. And one of the things which we have decided is the Sea Lion is an open source model, which can be used by anybody, and they can use it for their purpose. And interestingly, we also develop tools in order to build this large language model. So we collaborate on building those tools. And just to give you an example, the last partner there is a startup, agri-tech startup in Chennai, and they are trying to build a kind of a chat GPT for farmers. And they want to do it in Tamil there. And they are actually using OpenAI platform currently, and they find it very expensive. And ours is a free open source model. So they're giving us a lot of farming related conversations and question answers and data, which we are incorporating into the model. And why would they do that? Because they are also interested, so they're thinking ahead that we are a startup, we are not going to limit ourselves to India. Later on, if we have a good solution, we want to market in ASEAN. So they are actually experimenting with the Thai language capability, the Bahasa language capability of this model. So it's kind of a win-win partnership in which we kind of work with them to get high quality data, build models, share the models, and they also benefit from using these models, and then in turn actually they can employ this to actually go outside India. So I just wanted to give this example to start the conversation, and I'm happy to continue the discussion later on.
Thank you so much, Mohan. That was very informative, very enlightening, and I'm sure there will be queries on its prospects from the distinguished audience that we have over here. So let me now move on to Mr. Guruprakash Pai, the Chief Delivery Officer of Infosys Compaz Pte Ltd. Guru.
Thank you, Dr. Palit. Thanks, Professor Mohan. I think definitely those were very insightful views. So now I would just like to share a few thoughts from the industry. I come from an IT industry, and how we have looked at this whole digitalization and AI as the topic goes, and what are the potential opportunities for collaboration. Now, both the technologies and the underlying technologies for both digitalization and AI are going through a massive evolution. Because, everybody is learning. The technology that we had yesterday is obsolete today because there is something new that would have come. So, given the dynamics, or given this, dynamics or advancement, makes it all the more reason why these should be two vital areas for a collaboration between two vibrant economies like India and Singapore. Now, if you look at last few years, India has gone through tremendous amount of digital transformation. We have, the Aadhaar stack, we have UPI payment. Now, I don't think any of these would be applicable for Singapore, because Singapore has already implemented this in some form or shape. I would say other way around, right? Because I would say that India probably can learn a lot from the sophistication, the convenience, and ease of use what Singapore has implemented. Like since I am a person who has used these platforms in both the countries, I can tell you how fantastic usage of SingPass is. I don't need to remember so many passwords. I don't need to remember, fill so many forms, so many applications. It's like quite straightforward, right? But at the same time, I don't think India can replicate this, just like that, because perhaps many people in India may not have access to smartphones, right? We still need to look at how it can be replicated to, in Indian context. That's just one example of how, we can learn from this part. But coming to the next phase of collaboration, I would like to call out three key areas. Rather, I would call it 3S. Okay. First S is scale. Second S is skills, and the third one is security. Right. Now, these are three key drivers for the next phase of collaboration. Now, Professor Mohan called out the volume of data, right? And that is what I call as scale, or the volume of data, right? Now, let me give you some examples here, right? Now, if you look at, one of the best use cases for AI, which is, area like disease prevention, disease detection, and predictive diagnostics. Now, today, a lot of AI models are getting done for cancer detection and predictability of getting a disease. Now, any LLM, Professor introduced large language model, LLM. any LLM to be successful, any LLM to be accurate, or in order to enhance its predictability, it requires volume, it requires data. And perhaps India, because of our large population, large scale, large diversity, can provide the data. Now, the moment you have this data in the model, the accuracy of the model is enhanced. And the inferences from this model can be shared between these two economies. Because that's how, because Singapore being a small country, probably there may not be so much of data, there may not be so much of samples, may not be so much of cases that we can build a model on its own here. That's one example that I can think of. At the same time, many of these, I'm happy that Professor brought it up, that there are many situations that there may be many use cases like this, but let me tell you that building these LLMs requires significant amount of computing power, and it doesn't come cheap. Now, if there are any, any opportunities to collaborate in terms of how some of the computing power that Singapore might be having, or some of the models that Professor talked about, how that can be leveraged. Maybe some more data or some more samples from India can be further used to improve the predictability and accuracy of the model. Right? That's one part. Now, the second area is skills that I just talked about. Here, what I mean by skills is the shortage of skills, because this is something that both the economies are facing significant shortage of skills in many key areas or many niche areas, be it IT development, fintech, CRM, e-commerce. There are many areas, digital marketing. There are many areas which are having serious shortage of skills or talents. Now, AI can be effectively used to build these or address this talent gap. I'll give you an example of what my organization Infosys has developed. This is developed for one of the large financial institutions, global financial institutions that has operations in 42 countries. Now, this organization provides, a financial strategy and investment plans to HNIs and corporates, in different countries. Now, the challenge was that the kind of recommendations that each of the advisor was providing, and they had 25,000 advisors globally, and the kind of recommendation that the advisor was providing was still dependent on his or her experience or his or her maturity. Now, what we did was that we created a LLM using some close to 150,000 recommendations that were given to various individuals, and now this LLM helps the advisor, depending on the profile of the client, depending on the age of the client, and depending on the risk appetite of the client, the LLM, the model tells the advisor, look, perhaps for this customer, this is the best model. And the model gives the same recommendation to all the advisors. So there is far more amount of consistency, far more amount of accuracy of the this one. And in case, something like investment in gold must have been a great thing to do a month back, not today. But the model knows. But then I, as an individual, don't need to keep up with so much with the knowledge, because model tells me that, look, don't recommend this. It's gone. It's no longer valid. So these, I believe, can be leveraged perhaps in many of the industries. I would say knowledge-intensive industries, to bridge this skill gap, right? And the last one, of course, I talked about is security. Now, of course, there are a lot of stats in terms of how much Singapore and India are losing on a daily basis to different security scams and phishing scams and all that, right? And today, I don't think any of the technologies are able to accurately predict, the kind of malicious attacks or malicious, attacks that happens from the cyber standpoint. And this is again one more very strong use case that we are working on for enhancing the cyber security and threat prediction and all that. Now, this is one more area which can be very well used across two countries to share some of the studies or some of the aspects to in terms of how we can mutually share some of these and make both of our countries secure. Now these are, just to summarize, digitalization and AI are two primary pillars for collaboration, and out of that, three drivers are scale, skill, and security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guru. I think you have, very nicely brought up the core issues that not just have to be kept in mind going forward, but all these issues also reflect the challenges that are involved. And the challenges are fairly substantive in their own individual characters. Taken together, they are perhaps even more substantive. But I'm sure that given the enthusiasm and the necessities, to put in that way, that exist, there will be movements in these, and the industry perspective, along with the academic and learning perspective that Mohan shared, will actually be very effective in taking us to some initial solutions for moving forward. So with that, let me now move on to the second subject of this panel, and that is environmental sustainability and decarbonization along with green hydrogen. So may I have the pleasure of inviting Tulika Raj, CEO and co-founder of SunGreen H2, for her comments. Tulika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Guru, for your earlier comments. I would like to start out by saying that a lot of the concepts that were just discussed in the digitalization and the AI part of today's talk are also equally applicable to the environment and the energy sphere. We heard from Guru just now about scale, skills, and security. Let me invite you to translate that mentally for a second into the energy arena. And in India, nowhere more so than in India, we can really see the impact of all three. And I will try to cover that in my remarks. Sure. So a bit of background about SunGreen H2. SunGreen H2 is a Singapore-based company that is working globally to bring low-cost green hydrogen into use for rapid industrial decarbonization in very hard-to-abate sectors. And not just industry, but beyond that, of course, Singapore also has our own national hydrogen strategy. So we really believe that hydrogen can be that lever that can be used to decarbonize not just industry, but has specific applications beyond that in the shipping, maritime, aviation, power generation space as well. One of the fundamental things to think about when we talk about energy is it's predominantly a fossil fuel-based system that we are living in at the moment. And when we think about access to energy, we always talk about energy security in the next breath, because this is the primary driver. We are an energy hungry, let's say, nations are energy hungry, we humans are energy hungry, we are requiring energy in all forms to urbanize, to industrialize, to develop further, so on and so forth. If you think about India and the transformational role that renewable energy generation has played in India's energy security story, it's a massive success story. You can look at examples in the West of how we have had large feed-in tariffs and subsidies in the West have launched, let's say in the initial early decades, couple of decades ago, renewable energy, wind and solar. But India has catapulted the requirement for any kind of outsized subsidies, feed-in tariffs, etc., and very early on adopted an auction model for solar and wind capacity. Cut to the story today in 2024, India has one of the largest installed capacities of renewable energy, wind, solar especially, in this region and worldwide, counted as one of the top countries. Why in a green hydrogen presentation am I spending so much time talking about renewable energy, you may wish to ask? The point that I would like to make is hydrogen is intrinsically tied to the availability of large-scale renewable energy sources at low cost. Without cheap green electrons, you cannot actually have cheap green molecules manufactured. It's because we've made so much progress and inroads today into having wind and solar be the cheapest new form of energy generation in over 90% of the world's electricity markets, that we can now consider harnessing these green electrons to produce green molecules. Why do we need green molecules? Why don't we electrify everything? I spent 15 years in the wind and solar business, and I can tell you that I'm with the group that agrees wherever you can electrify, and if you can electrify without fossil fuels in the background, this should be done first. But there are some very hard to abate sectors driving a lot of our commodity consumption, ammonia, methanol, petrochemical refining, where you cannot actually consume renewable electricity in the form of electrons. And this is the reason why we should consider derivatives like green hydrogen, those molecules which can then help us on to further achieve our decarbonization journey. Without this, hard to abate sectors are not possible to decarbonize. Whether they take the form of utilizing hydrogen directly or a derivative of hydrogen like ammonia or methanol is a separate story. Like with all kinds of plastics that are produced from petrochemical refining, like with all kinds of fossil fuel derived products that we use today, similarly, green molecules and their derivatives will find the application of choice that suits best on a cost and scalability perspective. So green hydrogen being the building block of all of our green molecule-based decarbonization efforts, what is the status? We've talked about energy security. Let us talk about the scale and the skills part now. So here I would like to start by saying hydrogen is not a new market. It was already a 90 million ton market, let's call it 100 just for ease of numbers. And it's a $150 billion market. So we are already consuming a lot of hydrogen in the world. It is not a new quantity. The main issue is that hydrogen, when produced at the moment, is 99% plus derived from fossil fuels, either natural gas or coal. So first, if you're a nation that doesn't have abundant indigenous resources of natural gas or coal, you're probably disadvantaged in this regard. But second, if you think about the fact that you have ambitions for net zero and decarbonization, then again, fossil fuel-based deriving of hydrogen is not exactly going to help any of us meet our decarbonization goals. This is where the original form of producing hydrogen from water electrolysis comes in. So water electrolysis is the way 100 years ago that we first discovered how to make hydrogen, a very abundantly occurring molecule, right? We simply use electricity to split the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. All of us have also probably done the high school experiment where we are using a beaker of water, immersing 2 electrodes, driving a battery on top, and as soon as you switch it on, you see the bubbles of gas come out. This is electrolysis on a massive scale. It's the same concept. So if we can have a source of electricity that's green, and we have the electrolyzer machines that my organization, SunGreen H2, manufactures, you can start deriving hydrogen from water. It's because we had cheap fossil fuels available in the 60s that this original way of producing hydrogen has been displaced in recent years with natural gas and coal. What is the result? The result is that the hydrogen industry today is responsible for adding almost 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere. So we are on a mission and we have a vision to replace at scale fossil fuel derived hydrogen with green, clean hydrogen, which burns without producing any carbon dioxide emissions. And if we produce it from electrolyzers using green electricity, there are no carbon dioxide emissions in the production either. So this zero carbon pathway is the most promising to replace out the $150 billion worth of hydrogen that we are currently using. Why do I talk about scale? In this context, India is a very interesting example. There is a lot of government-backed mandates that we are now seeing being transferred into the green hydrogen space, which we have already seen the Indian government back in the wind and the solar space. So what we have is a massive opportunity to turn the 7 million ton hydrogen production industry in India, transform it with green hydrogen based initial displacement, and then think beyond that to commoditizing the green molecules into ammonia, into methanol, and eventually exporting. Where does an organization like SunGreen H2 come into this? In order to produce cheap green molecules, you do need the electrolyzer machines and you need the green electricity. We've talked about the fact that this green electricity is now available at scale and cheaply. Sungreen H2 is on a mission to make electrolyzers available at scale and cheaply. So what we have is proprietary technology derived in Singapore, commercializing over 10 years of research work carried out at A-Star at NUS, and bringing it to produce very highly efficient machines built without any precious metals for very long-lasting, durable electrolysis-based hydrogen production. With this, we deliver between $2 and $3 per kg of produced hydrogen cost today, and we are working at taking this made-in-Singapore technology with our partners in India to derive green hydrogen cheaply at scale. During this session, I look forward to your questions and discussing this topic further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tulika. I think you really made a reference to this very important question of scale, which always comes up in the conversation. Guru also alluded to it. Sometimes in an India-Singapore conversation, scale is a subject or an issue which gets to be looked at in very different perspectives. As a positive attribute, not so much of a positive attribute. But I guess today, with the kind of subjects that we are talking about, there's a certain degree of overlap between them, which enables scale to be handled in a much more effective and purposeful fashion than before. So thank you for that perspective. Can I now invite Mr. Marcus Lim, co-founder and chief executive officer of the Ecosoftt. Marcus.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Palit. So this topic about environmental sustainability, I think it's important to Singapore as it is to India. I'll just like to explore it from the perspective of what Singapore and India can do or do more together, such that it benefits both countries. Ecosofft, we are a company that provides water solutions for buildings and industries. Because of the low coverage of piped water and access to sewer networks, in many buildings in urban areas, there is a need for buildings, factories, hotels, and so on to provide for its own water systems. And that's what we do as an organization. And in a couple of conversations I have with my customers in India, I get asked this question: can you make my building or my estate look like Singapore? And that got me thinking. Well, first of all, we don't have the comprehensive set of solutions. I can install a water filtration system, and then you can drink the water from the tap, right? I can find my friend who's a landscape architect and beautify, your front yard, and put in a water feature, and then maybe it'll look like a building in Singapore, right? So there are some known problems and known solutions, okay? But then there are also some solutions which are not there, not satisfactory at least. So I take one example, which is solid waste management. But in Singapore, we use our garbage getting collected and it goes, gets incinerated by NEA, and we don't think about it. But in India, especially in some of the lower tier cities, not so straightforward. Rubbish may not get collected. If it gets collected, it then gets disposed somewhere not far away from your home, right? So known problem, unknown solution, or unsatisfactory solution. And finally, we have to recognize that Singapore is far from perfect as far as environmental sustainability is concerned, right? We have a huge challenge of trying to decarbonize our economy. We are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And I don't think we fully understand what is all the real impact of climate change. For example, if average temperatures goes up by 2.5 degrees, what is the impact on human health, right, and working outdoors? So unknown problems even. Okay. So let us just discuss along these three lines: known problems, known solutions, known problems, unknown solutions, and unknown problems, right? So first part, known knowns, right? So there are many things that Singapore is fairly good at that can be sort of exported to India, right? Town planning, waste management, incineration, waste to energy, water treatment, maybe hydrogen, emerging areas, that's come up, right? Granted, not all of those solutions were invented in Singapore, or even the products are manufactured in Singapore, but Singapore companies have learned how to design products, how to apply them, how to manage the supply chain. And that has got some value, to India as India starts to urbanize and try to urbanize in a sustainable way. But for the scale of the market, right, the scale of the potential, the trade and the kind of investments and collaboration between Singapore and India is relatively low. Right? We talked about this morning, why is it still so difficult to get Singapore companies, particularly SME, to be interested in India. Yeah? So there is a role for market facilitation, for finding the right partners, matchmaking, so on and so forth. Right? A lot of attention has been put into that. But fundamentally, Singapore companies, as they go to India, we can't just export the Singapore solution and hope that it works in India. Fundamentally, we have to try to find a business model for the Indian market. And we went through that ourselves. When we first started off, we thought, well, there's a market in India and buildings, residential development, more than 40 units, you have to put in the sewage treatment plant. So we were manufacturing something in China. I said, well, let's take that, go through Singapore, and then export it to India. Right? Put it there, done. Take advantage of the low-cost manufacturing in China, make a margin, book it in Singapore. Well, we failed, right? We failed quite miserably, right? Because there's a whole logistics cost, there's import duties, there are differences in standards, and so on and so forth. And we went through a very difficult process eventually to localize, that product, design in Singapore, but to Indian standards, right? Customize it to local pipe size, electrical, standards, and so on and so forth. Make it cost effective for the local market. Find the right components, the right supply chain over there. And eventually we got that to work, and I'm proud that that won the FICCI first prize in technology innovation. Right? Today we are exporting out of India. Something came to Singapore, and eventually now going as far out as Latin America. Right? So fundamentally, it's not just about taking something from Singapore and putting it in India. We've got to reinvent the business. And on top of that, I think a lot of those things, as far as environment is concerned, it's about infrastructure, right? I think more of that investment in infrastructure, needs to go in. There's money in Singapore that's waiting on the sidelines, and how do you actually move more of that money around? Right? Of course, you're going to make the project bankable, and I think very important aspects is actually, maybe standardizing it, looking at the taxonomy, the green taxonomy that's been created in Singapore, how to harmonize that with something that India is trying to create as well. So that's known. Then you have known problems, unknown solutions. So an example is adaptation to climate change. Right? Singapore, we have 30% of our land at less than 5 meters above sea level. Okay? Huge problems, right? With climate change, we could have more increased flooding, and PM Lee, in one of his National Day rally speeches, has said that we probably will have to spend $100 billion on coastal protection for a 200-kilometer coastline. India has a 7,000-kilometer coastline, right? So a lot of new solutions will have to be discovered. And that is where I see that opportunity for Singapore and India, to collaborate to find new solutions to that problem. We are starting research on coastal protection. We're learning from the Dutch, but we can't wait for Singapore to develop the solution and export to India. I mean, India needs to also learn at the same time. Now, why not India and Singapore collaborate to work on that? In some cases, it might be just about planting mangroves. In some cases, about reclamation, building seawalls, and more sophisticated measures, right? Many such examples as well, especially in the topic of decarbonization, hydrogen, maybe carbon capture, maybe nuclear, right? Small modular reactors, right? Is something that both Singapore and India are interested in. And the third is, really unknown problems and unknown solutions. And that is when, we need to then start to have that capacity, training people from young. We have a fairly good, education, higher education and research ecosystem, but we have one problem. Right? We don't have people. right? The NUS and NTU are struggling to find, even PhD candidates in the engineering faculty. Now, where are we going to find such people, right? That's got to come from India, right? Among other places as well, right? So having, joint training programs, research collaboration, and it need not just about technical fields, it can also be about social science, because a lot of those measures that we need to take to adapt to climate change relates to human behavior, relates to policy, and so on. So a lot of that, training, a lot of that joint research collaboration can happen and should happen. Yeah. I'll just pause at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, for being very specific and bringing to our attention some of the concrete on-ground examples that can really be taken forward. And I think the point that you raised with respect to the coastline, that's really something which is worth a very serious thought, and I'm very sure that there are stakeholders on both sides who are looking at it very closely. Thank you for those insights. So with that, now we can move to the third subject of this panel that, again, we are looking at very closely, the issue of cooperation in food industry. May I invite Mr. N Muthukumar, the Group Chief Financial Officer of Olam, for your comments, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. We are now coming back to brass tacks. From heady technology to what can we do in several other areas. This is something where, end of the day, we have to eat to live. And this is something which is non-substitutable and fundamental to our day-to-day living. And so the food and ag industry is something which probably is a solution, at the same time a problem on many fronts. Some of you talked about greenhouse gas emissions. Today, agriculture is responsible for 1/3 of the world's GHG emissions. And at the same time, if you look at the food and ag industry, demand is very predictable. So we have growing population. We have the demographically getting younger population, and especially in emerging markets and more so in Africa. So we are looking at 3 billion people being added between now and 2100, most of them in Africa, with a median age of 25 to 30 years. And directionally, there is affluence that is increasing from below poverty line to living wage to potentially a middle class affordability, which means that aspirationally, the growing population from here on will try and consume more protein-based diets rather than carbohydrate-based diets, which is today 75% of the emerging markets consumption is more carb-based diets. All of which mean significant demand for more food, feed, like poultry feed and fish feed, because if you want to move into meat-based consumption or fish or other aqua consumption, you need to divert some of the food into feed. Right. Now, however, the key problem we are all facing is supply. So first is, we talked about climate change. I wouldn't elaborate on that. I think most of us are very sensitive to climate change and the impact of it. But what most of us possibly are not very well clued on is that biodiversity collapse. So what I mean by biodiversity collapse is that in the world, the earth scientists say that we have 1 million species, including one of us is, out of the 1 million is one, which is the human beings. And every toad, every animal, every flora, fauna is all the part of the 1 million species. And the earth scientists say that for the earth to continue to be sustainable, we cannot afford to lose more than 10 species a year. And today we are losing 1,000 species a year. And I can give you an example from our own company, Olam example. We have a very large almond orchards or plantations in Australia, extremely expensive. And the bulk of the success of that is that how well the honeybees which are there can pollinate the flowers, which can then convert into fruits, and which then convert into what you and I eat as almonds. So 2 years back, when the Victoria State banned movement of honeybees to New South Wales, where our almond orchards are, we had roughly half the number of beehives that we required to pollinate our almond orchards. And when we harvested, we had shells and no nuts inside. And in the middle of last year, in 2023, we had to take a more than $100 million write-off in terms of what can. So imagine just one honeybee availability can cause significant economic impact as well as non-availability of food. So I'm just stressing on the biodiversity collapse is probably 1,000 times more important for all of us to learn than climate change impact. The third is the geopolitical tensions. All of us are aware of it. I would not elaborate on it, which creates significant supply chain disruptions. Then consequently, every government gets into regulatory intervention, thinking it is the right thing to do, absolutely the wrong thing to do. And you can have palm oil exports, whether it is dutied in Indonesia or banned. Similarly, in India, export of rice being banned or export of wheat being banned, or increase in customs duty at times for some commodities to protect, ostensibly to protect local industry, all of which creates considerable supply chain disruptions. Now, a country like Singapore, which is fully dependent on imported food, while there are a lot of efforts being made in trying to be 30 by 30, it's a tall order, it's a huge challenge. And then I would like to separate the food into perishables and non-perishables. Perishables are primarily fruits, vegetables, red meat, fish, or aqua. And non-perishables, broadly, end of the day, all food items are perishable, but I would say the definition would be a long shelf life. Items like rice and wheat and corn and soybean, palm oil, rapeseed oil, soybean oil, soy meal, etc., which are living essentials. We need to consume every day, frequently, weekly, for us to sustain ourselves. So how do we ensure that these are available for Singapore? Fortunately, Singapore is an affluent country. It can afford, even if in a situation of rapid food price inflation that we witnessed in the last 2-3 years, post-COVID especially, Singapore is able to afford in terms of ability to buy at high prices. That's not a problem, which is a significant problem for several emerging countries who do not have the affluence. However, just to look at the food cooperation requirement, why should India be interested in sending food to Singapore? Because I'm stressing this because we are talking about a subject called food cooperation. There can always be a trade at a value, and then every Indian exporter can be private sector, public sector, can be interested in exporting food into Singapore. That is one value proposition. But that may not be sustainable because tomorrow Middle East can pay more than Singapore. Or there can be a geopolitical shift, where India will say, okay, I will export to other countries rather than to Singapore because the size of the market is not very attractive. So that is where the give and take policy of what Singapore can contribute to India. Here is technology, agri-technology. Today, if you look at the food production in India, 70% of the food is produced by smallholder farmers. They are mostly below poverty line. So how do you ensure that they become, if not prosperous, at least better in terms of their economic well-being, can only be done through technology. So providing them access to superior agri-practices, agronomy advice, ensuring that they are able to grow food sustainably without damaging the topsoil. All of that can happen through availability of agricultural technology, which can come at fraction of a cost than what is available today. If, for example, Singapore can contribute to that, say that it is for securing, for food security, for ensuring Singapore's food security, I'm going to contribute to, let's say, the Indian agricultural industry so much of ag-tech support. Treat it as a grant or treat it as a food security insurance. And that is where fundamentally the difference will come. So what we are looking at from an Indian perspective, incidentally, I was in Hyderabad yesterday, and we were talking about food security for India. And the whole smallholder farmers are going through a revolution in terms of aggregating what they call as FPOs, farmer producer organizations, to get access to ag technology, superior agri inputs, affordable credit. Because most of them are today below poverty line because they are all subject to money lenders' influence. So how do you get that sorted out? Can also be a solution that Singapore can provide in terms of providing access to affordable credit, right? So these are some of the ideas that I believe can be a give and take from a concept of food cooperation between a country that is a large producer and can be an exporter. India is the largest rice exporter in the world. 11 million tons of rice is being exported. We as Olam were the largest exporter of rice from India at 1.1 million tons a year till they banned overnight, right? And similarly in wheat, and similarly now we are having issues in other commodities as well. So how do you ensure that international trade, which the world has enjoyed for decades, is not destroyed because of geopolitical tensions? And ensuring free trade, international trade, especially on food, is always available. One significant point to note is that throughout the history of mankind, whether it is World War I, World War II, various wars, sanctions, food and medicine are the only two which have never been sanctioned. So I will probably conclude by saying that there has to be a give and take bilaterally, and more importantly, as a concept, we have to ensure, collectively, we have to ensure that international trade has to be there, because only few countries can produce and many countries have to consume. And that is something which is very important for all of us to understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muthu, for that, because I think you brought in elements in your submission which are actually by themselves complex, by themselves new, and I think I can touch upon this point in the sense that when the area of food security is being discussed in an India-Singapore perspective, it's not a very traditional subject. And this is something which has come into resonance largely after the outbreak of the COVID-19 and the kind of troubles that the food supply chains experienced at that point in time. But I think the point that you mentioned with respect to biodiversity, and the fact that that biodiversity is getting affected by the geopolitical tensions, this is something which, by way of challenge, is very unique to the food industry. And that also affects big and large countries in similar ways. So, a very populous country like India, at the same time, a city-state like Singapore, are kind of uniquely affected by these challenges. So thank you for bringing those perspectives. I'm sure we'll discuss more on them. So if I could now bring in Mr. Harsh Rajpal, our last panelist for today, but not the least panelist, certainly. Over to you, Rajpal. Rajpal is Harsh Rajpal, founding partner of the Capital Court. Thank you.
And thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are, as Capital Court, we invest purely on the food and agribusiness value chain, both in India and Southeast Asia. I agree with some of the points Muthu made, that they cannot be just a transactional partnership between India or Singapore or any other country for food security. It has to be more holistic, and we always have believed that there are 4 levers around which a comprehensive partnership can be made. Obviously starts with trade, investment, and leveraged by science as well as policy between the two countries. So maybe because my whole background has always been investing and working in the food chain, I thought I'll just share 3 examples of work from which we are doing, which tangibilizes hopefully the potential of cooperation between India and Singapore, consistent with the theme of the panel today. So the first example is we are investors in a company called EMILI. EMILI stands for Asian Microbiome Library. As we all know, gut health is a very, very important aspect of health. And other than genes, microbiome is really dependent on the environment we all live in, but more importantly, the food we consume. So EMILI has built the Southeast Asia's first microbiome database, through which you can, among other things, prebiotics, postbiotics, it validates or helps formulate food ingredients and foods which could be good for gut. So as part of their work, they realized that millets, which comes from India and largely grown in India, is very, very good for gut. So they collaborated with one of the Indian millet companies to really scientifically validate that which kind of gut microba are actually positively impacted by millets. And together they are now planning to launch a gut shot beverage, both targeted at the South Asian population, because again, the formulation can be very different. Even Indian origin people living in Singapore would have a very different gut microba based on the Indian people living in India. So that's one way we are kind of fostering collaboration, as also building on what Muthu said, science leveraging from Singapore, as well as the ingredient like something like millets, which is largely grown in India, and India can be a large exporter. The other example here also is where there have been initial talks, and we even visited the Tata Prebiotics Institute in Pune, where again, can we share data of the microbiome data they have in the Pune under Tata Special Agri Ingredients, and collaborate with Singapore again to formulate products which are more gut friendly, suited to the Asian population. The second example is a company we have invested in India is Sapphire Agri Warehousing. It's one of the largest rice, wheat, and pulses storage warehousing company in India, with 147 sites, storage sites, and 3.8 million metric tons under storage. So in addition to, of course, they being one of the players and enablers of rice exports out of India to Singapore and other parts of the world, we are helping them partner with a Singapore biochar, rice husk-based biochar company in Singapore, and it's consistent with Singapore's ambition to become a carbon services and carbon science hub, helping decarbonization in the agri-food value chain, amongst others. So what biochar is, basically, we all eat rice. The husk, which is coming out of the rice, it decomposes back into the atmosphere and causes some of the smoke and fires we see in India as well as other where rice is produced. So you take that husk and you convert through pyrolysis, you convert it into a natural fertilizer called biochar, which can be used back to the rice fields or in poultry bedding, or even a mix with concrete and cement. And that captures the carbon for hundreds of years, and it also generates carbon credits. So this company is doing already this work with Philippines, but then we're now partnering them with Sapphire to set up the first rice husk-based biochar facility in Punjab, which can then also help with some of not only decarbonizing and increasing yields in rice, but also help with some of the fires and smoke issues in Punjab. So that's a second example where I think, again, there's a good potential. And third, last example is more about we investors in an Indian traditional food ingredient company called Zama Organics. Many of you may know that India is actually the second largest organic food exporter. And again, as Indian culture spreads across the world, so is demand of traditional Indian ingredients like black rice from Manipur, khapli wheat flour, spices, cumins. So we're working with the Texang, which is a third generation Singaporean food company, and seeing how they can collaborate and bring more of these traditional food ingredients of India into Singapore, as well as a beachhead into ASEAN. So I would actually like to end, hopefully these three examples give you some tangible idea on where we believe bottom up from our work where there's huge potential. I would like to end on a broader and a personal note that I actually came to Singapore 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago in 2004 to study at NUS, the National University of Singapore. And since then, obviously, like many of my friends, we have made Singapore our home. And as I grew in Singapore, I realized that Singapore was able to participate in the China's growth story in the last 20 years or 30 years, especially in the areas of manufacturing, precision manufacturing, other things. And there, I think Singapore already had a benefit of ethnicity, language, etc. Like I think most of us believe the next 2 decades will be India's growth story. And so hopefully Indian origin Singaporeans like me can hopefully continue to play a role in hopefully Singapore also partaking in India's growth story.
Thank you, Harsh. That's a very robust note to conclude the first round of discussions on, and I'm very happy you raised this distinction between the cereals and non-cereals, which in the area of food sourcing just have a lot of significance. So, friends, we have had a very sort of rich and diverse and varied collection of insights on 3 themes that we have up here in this panel on digitalization and AI, on environmental sustainability, and finally food cooperation. Now, I do have on my side certain thoughts that I wanted to check out with the panelists with, but before that, I am aware of the fact that we don't have too much time for discussion. So if there are questions from the floor, we'll be happy to take them. If anybody wants to go first. Oh, thank you. So we will unfortunately have to maintain an order or a sequence, which I am again unfortunately declaring has to be very subjective. It is who catches my sight first. I have spotted Ravi for a long time, but Ravi, the first turn will go to your left. So the lady wielding the mic. Please go ahead.
I apologize for being so large.
No comments on that. Please introduce yourself if you don't mind, and if there's a specific panelist you'd want your answer to be from.
Thank you, sir. I think you really did a great job summarizing the salient points. So I made my notes based on what you said. So thank you for that. My question is twofold and very sharp to Mr. Muthukumar from Olam. Will you use Mohan's farmwise.ai for any of your midterm future plans? Second question to Tulika and Marcus, would you use what Mr. Guruprakash said on terms of the LLMs for your next roadmap? These are my two questions.
Thank you. So let's start from Muthu.
I will take that quickly. So thank you. Basically, when we were discussing about the digital penetration to farmers, it was more from, one is the education part of it, the farmer education in terms of their ability to understand the latest practices and then benefit from that. The second aspect of it is that it will take a long time for them to get educated. So many of them are already past the learning stage. So for them to use, let's say, a smartphone and have a voice-based or an AI-based agronomy nudge every day. And using artificial intelligence and machine learning, we are already implementing that in India, where we see that every day in the morning they get up, they want to see whether a price of their commodity, or they want to see whether what they have to do, like putting fertilizer or pesticide in their microsite. Actually, every day is the way they are saying, we are able to learn and then provide them the necessary customized nuanced nudge. That's one. The second part of the AI is they are all voice-based or video-based. So the whole thing is about not text. So some part of it, what Professor Mohan was talking about is text. But what we have seen, at least in the Indonesian example in Medan and in India, in Madhya Pradesh, especially with tribal women, I think the voice and video worked better than text.
Thank you. Tulika, would you like to come in? And then.
Yeah, thank you. So fundamentally, the science of producing hydrogen from water, electrolysis, is really rooted in the sciences that have to do with electrochemistry and material science. So I can speak a little bit to some of the fundamental tech that is behind our solution is based in very high efficiency electrodes that are able to mimic the performance of precious metals in terms of performance, but yet they are not precious metals. Now, where does AI and large language model come into this is on the material discovery platform side, we are able to leverage a lot of this type of emerging learning to enhance our R&D efforts to, let's say, today we are producing 90% efficient electrolyzers. We would like to get to 95. Can you get there? Yes. Would you like to get there faster? We believe in utilizing material discovery platforms aided by AI for this. Yeah.
I have to say that water is not a very smart industry. Right? It's very conservative in terms of the adoption of technologies. And 90% of areas where there is a municipal, or where there is a public supply of water, the systems are owned by the public sector. Right? So not very progressive generally. Okay? But having said that, more and more of this kind of AI and smart digital technologies are coming to the water sector. Okay? In terms of predicting system performance, that is starting to happen. In terms of, they say, for example, in operations and maintenance, there is a Singapore startup that's developed an app, where the operator can talk to that app and say, what should I do now, right? And the app will just give them, a suggestion, press this button and do that, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I think that is just slowly coming into the water sector. I think what has happened, I think in the case of India, because there is still so much to be done, and this is now coming at a time when all these AI technologies are still emerging, there's an opportunity for India to say that, okay, let's just leapfrog that technology, as what India has done, in terms of telecoms, right? Not just adopting the practices of what has been done in New York, London, Singapore, and even China and so on, to move into the next generation of technologies.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Tulika, and thank you, Muthu. Okay, the next hand, yeah, please go ahead.
Microphone on this table. All right. So my question is to Tulika Ji. My name is Rahul.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am. So my name is Rahul. I am from NTU, working in the President's office. The question is to Tulika Ji. It's about hydrogen. So the hydrogen story, as far as I understand, is not an energy production story. It's more like an energy storage story. And there is a reason why I say that. When you take water, water is H2O, right? And you're trying to break that molecule to get hydrogen and oxygen we don't care about. And then we are trying to use that hydrogen again to burn it and make water again. So the story here is that I will need energy to break that molecule in order to recombine that molecule with oxygen. So if we agree with the second law of thermodynamics, you'll be using more energy to produce less energy. So far we are not gaining anything here, and we are assuming that we'll get a cheap source of energy, maybe solar or whatever renewable, and then we are going to be able to store this hydrogen and transport it to where it's needed. My question is essentially, what's the advantage? If I have a cheap source of energy, why can't I use battery or some other means, or wire, which is already there, which is much easier to transport? Why do I need to invent an entire supply chain where I am transferring this energy in the form of hydrogen from the source to where it needs to be used?
Thank you for the question. It's going to take us on a deep dive into hydrogen, everyone, so please stay tuned. Firstly, the entire global market for hydrogen at the moment uses hydrogen as a molecule, not to convert back to an electron. Why? Because hydrogen has one of the largest energy contents per unit of any other type of fuel. Diesel, gasoline, so on and so forth. So there is a huge energy content in hydrogen. As a feedstock, it is directly used in the synthesis of ammonia as a molecule. We need it. Without it, we cannot produce the chemical combination that you need to make ammonia for fertilizers. So that's how we feed the world. And petrochemical refining, of course, will go down over the, let's say, 50 to 100-year period, but at the moment, uses hydrogen again as a molecule, as a feedstock. So does methanol. Methanol is a commodity that is used to produce everything today, from car parts to paints, that are very much a part of our everyday lives. Again, this process of producing methanol is also based on using hydrogen as a feedstock. So firstly, hydrogen is used as a feedstock. 90 to 100 million tons of it is being produced and consumed globally today. The idea is to produce it without carbon dioxide emissions, directly to use it as a molecule. There is no such thing as free energy. So no energy consuming process will be 100% efficient. I again would say the same thing, that wherever we can electrify, we should electrify. It's where green electrons stop that green hydrogen molecules start. A good example of this is the battery-based system that you proposed. If we talk about energy storage, hydrogen is the longest lasting molecule that can be cheaply stored, for example, in underground salt cavern storages, with the cost of this storage per unit stored cheaper than any form of electron stored in a battery. That's one point about volume of energy that can be stored using hydrogen. The second point is also about discharge, length of storage. Batteries will discharge in about 16 hours. So there is a limit to how long you can store and how much energy, therefore, you can store with batteries. Beyond the traditional lithium and other types of batteries that are available today, people are looking at flow batteries for longer duration storage. But even so, hydrogen is a commodity that once produced from electricity can be stored for seasons. Seasons. And one of the reasons this is important to take into our consideration is that if you think about the terawatt hours and terawatt hours of renewable electricity that is planned to come online in India and worldwide, there is a lot of intermittency associated with renewable energy sources. So what that ends up doing is creating a lot of grid instability. And you think about our grid infrastructure, it takes 100+ years to set up grid. Now we are talking about terawatt hours and terawatt hours of additional capacity coming online. Can grid infrastructure upgrade so fast? The problem of curtailment with renewables is already well known. One of the smart things that we can do for large-scale management of curtailed renewable electricity is to store it as hydrogen, which can then seasonally become available to be converted back, if needed, into electrons via a fuel cell. So there's lots and lots of different applications for hydrogen, both as a feedstock and as a fuel, and eventually to power stationary and mobility-based fuel cells. We have to think about the horses for courses applications that make sense and always assess the most economic way to produce, consume, store, and pitch it. And one fun fact for everybody, if you think about hydrogen, it is cheaper per unit to store than electrons in large-scale salt cavern storage, which is the way that we are going to commodify store this commodity. It is also cheaper per unit to transmit than electrons through transmission line, through a pipeline. So, fun fact, food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a fun fact, but that's going to be substantive to absorb. Thank you. Before I spot other hands being raised, I have spotted you, sir, and if you could just allow me the liberty as the moderator to ask a question. And this is for Professor Mohan Kankanhalli. Mohan, I really like that example that you showed with respect to the Tamil language and the academies and the partnerships that you have created. And I'm pretty much sure that when it comes to the sea lion, there is a plan to extend it to other Indian languages over time. But before that is implemented, are there some of the challenges that you would like to share that this extension has faced till now, at least with respect to the Tamil language experience?
Okay, I don't think we have any plans for Sea Lion to be extending to other Indian languages.
Okay.
But there are enough efforts in India, especially AI for Bharat and all, which are building Indian language, LLMs. Having said that, we are actually sharing our experience, and I think that should hopefully help the Indian effort. I think, again, the dirty secret of having very good quality large language models is data. And I don't want to be sued, but I can say that there are certain extremely high quality large language models which have been trained on copyrighted data without telling the copyright owners that they've been used. One of the things which we made a very important decision when we were building Sea Lion is, being Singapore, I think we are very squeaky clean. We are using very clean data to build, so that there is absolutely no future concern that by releasing Sea Lion or using it in any way, we are violating anybody's copyrights, okay? Which cannot be said for many of the other large language models available. So I think the real challenge is, how do you manage to get consent of data owners to part with their data in a responsible manner? I think that is one, that is the most important challenge. The second is the quality of data. I think there is a whole bunch of data which can be just scraped, but there could be nonsensical data, there can be contradictory data, and if you ask a particular a large language model a certain question, you might get an answer, and the answer quality depends on the quality of the data put in. So having high quality data is very important. and tremendous amount of efforts we spend in making sure that the training data is of high quality. And this is something which is not easily scalable. And I think we are trying, again, to build tools. And in certain sense, you have to be really clever is, can you use AI to help build better AI? So in a way, there is a kind of a recursive self-referential bootstrapping. And that is what we are trying to kind of do. I mean, a lot of things I think we have to figure out. It's not known, there is research to be done, and there are better techniques to be invented. But that makes it very exciting.
Yeah. In fact, Mohan, I think you in a sense hit the nail on the head, because this brings us to this very important question of security. Security is one of the 3 S's that Guru also mentioned. And Guru, this is a point on which I wanted to check something with you, that, you come from the Infosys, and Infosys has this, great distinction of managing the entire taxpayer database for India, which by itself in terms of scale is a phenomenal achievement. Now, I'm not going to put you into a spot and check from you what are the security issues that arose over that management. But what I wanted to just come back to you on, and connecting to what Mohan shared, that it seems that when it is a question of cross-border cooperation in digital interoperability based on AI learning and practices, this entire question of consent, similarity insofar as systems are concerned, modules and practices are concerned, is very important. So obviously India and Singapore have begun efforts in this regard. But do you think there's still some distance to be covered in this respect before more enterprises can be willing to take up this collaboration? We have seen collaborations in the field of, let us say, like digital finance platforms. PayNow and UPI has happened. But do you think that if this digital collaboration needs to be becoming more far-reaching, is there a challenge to be overcome?
Absolutely. I think you brought out a very valid point. Yes, there are definitely many more areas where this digital collaboration can be extended to. Having said that, going back to what Professor Mohan said, I think there is a lot more important. It's very important to consider. In Infosys we call it ethical and responsible AI. Like how the data that I am talking about is not is not under any copyrights, right? It's extremely important to ensure that the model that I'm going to bring or the solution that I'm going to build is ethical and responsible. When I talk about responsible, let me give you a few examples here, right? Maybe I'll request you to try this out. Today we have GPT and Bard and different conversational AI models, Gen AI models, right? I will ask you, maybe try asking a simple question. The question is, if Earth was as big as a football, what will be the diameter of the Earth? Just try asking this question and try to find out how each of these models give you different answer. The point I'm trying to make is that each of these models are still evolving. And we call it we call it hallucinations within each of the LLMs that provide, right? The point is that there are, there are still these models as they were evolving. I am not saying that none of them are 100% perfect. And that is where perhaps, I think maybe some of the models are much more mature what India has built. And there may be few more models that Singapore has built, which is much more mature, right? The best example that Professor Mohan was talking about in terms of how they are, cooperating or how they are collaborating with, some of the organizations for, in Tamil Nadu to build that, build or make that model much more accurate. And that is where, this is just one example that I've talked about in language. We talked about in, fintech and other areas. But I'm sure there are many more areas, right? Healthcare could be one. And, Dr. Palit brought out about Infosys managing a large amount of tax transactions on our platform. Yes, in fact, identifying tax frauds is not very easy. And today we are leveraging AI big time to identify potential frauds. I mean, I'm just using the word potential because everybody that the model tells is not a fraudster. But then some patterns of payments, some patterns of transactions can trigger the model to say that, oh yeah, probably this is, this something seems fishy. Let's try to decipher, or let's try to debug, right? The point is that in the olden days, there was no scientific approach to identify what is malicious and what is genuine. And today, I'm not saying again the model is perfect. It is evolving. And as Professor Mohan said, maybe we have to leverage AI to build a better AI model, right? And then, yes, just to conclude, yes, there are a lot of areas, fintech, CRM, marketing, and this education, healthcare, where definitely there are these models can be shared and the appropriate knowledge can be exchanged. Palit.
Many thanks for the thought, Guru. And okay, I'll go back to the audience. So, sir, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Abhijit Beura. I'm a co-founder of an AI-based ad tech firm called TrueAd. My question, I think there was some kind of telepathy. Dr. Amitendu, you asked that question specific to other languages, but I'll go a bit further because it's sea lion. Is there a possibility of translating, or you saw English to Tamil or Tamil to English, right? Tamil to Bahasa. When you use the LLM model, is that doable directly, or it goes via the English channel? Because Tamil is a very old language, right? It will have words that are not in the English dictionary. So how do you solve that? And I think Mr. Pai touched upon the hallucination part, which I had also that question, that this LLM model, how do you address the hallucination part of it? Because try to get you the best answer that the model understands at that stage. Thank you.
I suppose this was addressed to me. I think the translation part, yes, I think you can do within the language handled by C-Line, you can do translation from any to any. So I think that is not an issue. So I think it can be done. And I would say, I think in terms of the language translation, we measure the quality based on the benchmarks. And I would say right now it's the best model in terms of the benchmarks, which doesn't mean it's the best model possible. The model is still improving. As you said, we put in more data and have a larger, in fact, parameter size. The generalization ability improves and it becomes better. So I think it's work in progress, and it is improving. Now, as far as hallucination goes, this is actually a very serious issue and a problem. In fact, I myself as a researcher, I'm looking into hallucination. Our group, I'm very proud to say, we have actually proven that you can never get rid of hallucination. We have a mathematical proof for that. So it's a serious problem for using LLMs. Having said that, there are many ways of mitigating it. I think to give you a very simple answer, you don't just rely on the training data of the large language model, and you use some external knowledge source. And one of the common method which people are using these days is known as RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, where you use a combination of finding either your own personal other documents which you trust more, or you can search from the web or from any other source which you trust more, and combine it with the LLM. Again, there are different methods where you can then inject more logic and better kind of checking in order to improve. But these are problems which people are actively working on around the world, and this is kind of a well-recognized problem, And it is, I would say there are improvements as we speak, which happen. But definitely it's not going to go away completely using only LLM. You have to use LLM plus something.
In fact, Professor, you brought out a very valid point. In fact, we say that hallucination is not a bug, but it's a feature that needs to be improved.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you, Guru, for
Thank you.
that. And we have another hand raised up there. Yeah, I'll come back to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Frederick. I'm an AI venture builder, and it's quite nice for me to come in right now just to ask you a couple of questions. Well, having heard that you talk about AI hallucination, I wanted to find out if there's collaboration opportunities to address AI hallucination. I specialize and patented also in India as well. I do not know whether you heard of this thing called neuro-symbolic AI. So I specialize in that, and I think that I would like to explore opportunities to develop, instead of large language model, I am promoting this idea about expert small model for the farms, for the agriculture, for energy, and so forth. Further to that, I also wanted to find out if you have considered deepening the security with tokens, blockchain, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. Mohan.
Okay, thank you. I think definitely neurosymbolic approaches are one of the other approaches which will help strengthen the models. And I think a lot of people in the world, including my own group, we are looking into that. So I'm happy to have an offline conversation with you about that. Again, I think a lot of things, if you go to the history of AI, it started off more of symbolic AI. And the reason why it did not work well is you can handcraft rules, you can build rules and all that, it was not scalable. And therefore, over the last decade or so, the data-driven paradigm has taken over because you can take large scales of data and you can do training. But there are advantages of data-driven AI, which means it is fast and it's scalable, but it's not 100% accurate. Symbolic-based approaches are very accurate, but it works on mostly toy problems. And the question is, how do you combine the best of both while reducing the disadvantages of both? And this is a very active area of pursuit. So I think definitely this is something which a lot of people are considering, and I'm glad to know that you are also working on that.
Thank you. Guru, you want to add something?
I think maybe I will request you to read one article published by Infosys on top 10 AI imperatives. So one point that some of our experts have talked about is, I don't think we are going behind. My model is big, his model, your model is, my model is bigger than yours, kind of thing. Because it's not size of the model that matters. Because when we have to address a specific problem, it is the relevance of the model that becomes key, right? If rather than building a big model, you try to focus on build smaller models that are very relevant for a specific use case, right? That will be far more effective. That's our hypothesis, and that seems to have worked quite well. And that is one of the, one of the findings or one of the learnings that we have, that it's not size that matters, but relevance that matters. Absolutely.
Yes, please. Your question.
Okay. I think first of all, thank you for the session. My name is Michael. I work in the sustainable finance and develop AI for sustainability. So my question would be, given that most sustainability initiatives are usually cost centers, do you have any case studies that have managed to turn a cost related to sustainability into something that have generate revenue, and whether you can quantify it? And the second part is whether automation and AI has actually helped to improve the scalability of your sustainability initiative. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is a fairly wide-ranging question in terms of its implications. So can I ask both my colleagues from the sustainability cluster as well as from the food corporation to please address this question? Yeah, Harsh, you could go ahead.
I can start with one. I think one example what I shared is in rice production. If you take the biochar, is actually a sustainability initiative because the key revenue driver is still the carbon capture, right? But at the end of the day, it adds to the income. So earlier, if let's say you don't use biochar, then your income source would only be rice sales from rice. And in this case, you also have additional income stream from husk sale because if let's say I'm a rice miller, I'm a small rice miller, but my capacity is not as big as what I need to set up a pyrolysis unit to convert the husk into biochar, then in that case I can sell it to some other guy. So I'll get additional sales from the husk, right? And if I actually can have a sizable 10 metric ton per day kind of production, I can set up the pyrolysis unit. So that adds additional revenue source, which was otherwise not captured. Other thing is pyrolysis, you have to heat it at very, very high degree of temperature, like 500 degrees Celsius, the pyrolysis unit. So that also generates heat and it generates electricity through which you can also power your unit or even the nearby units, depending on what's the quantum of that. So in that case, it is, in a way, maybe you can sell the electricity, but if nothing else, you can reduce your electricity cost. So like for example, we are doing in Philippines, there where cost of electricity is very high, right? Then this also becomes a very tangible economic driver.
Thank you. Muthu, would you like to add to that? And then we can come to Marcus and Tulika in that order.
So quickly, I will probably add on to what Harsh said. There are many use cases wherein sustainability can be linked to economics. So very simply put, I can go on and on how many use cases are there in the food and ag industry. For example, if you look at region, the power generation cogen that we talked about, in many of our factories that we run across the world today, we are moving away from diesel run generators, fossil fuel run generators to cogen, as we call, where our own byproduct waste is being recycled to generate power. So that it kind of becomes a circular economy and that focus on zero waste. So that actually adds up to your bottom line. The second part of it is beyond utilizing for your own, how can you actually put up the excess power into the grid that you generate, right? And that is the other stream of revenue that, because it's clean energy and you are putting it to the grid and that you generate additional revenue. So there are both advantages of making your own operations more efficient, right, while sustainable, and also have a third-party revenue generation while being sustainable.
Yeah, so I'll give an example from the water sector where I operate in. Well, anybody who lives in an Indian city, right, understand water sometimes, officially it's cheap or free, as in the case of Delhi, promised free water. But it's cheap but not available. And many of the cases, the term tanker mafia, it becomes quite prevalent, right? They actually have to buy water from private sources, and the cost of that water is 5 times of what we pay in Singapore. At 5 times of what you pay in Singapore, recycling makes a lot of sense. Huge economic, I'll say, very quick payback in that.
Tulika, would you like to add anything to what Marcus has said and the others have mentioned from the food side to this particular question?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the energy side, we are pretty much here to try and get that whole sector to reliably and sustainably, decarbonize. And ultimately, I don't think anything is adopted at large scale unless the economics make sense. So I think really the fundamental driver here is that both have to go hand in hand. Sungreen H2, for example, is exactly very focused on producing cheap green hydrogen. Cheap being the fundamental point, because otherwise some of the industries that are consuming this hydrogen are extremely price sensitive. When you make your ammonia and your fertilizers, you really don't want your feedstock cost to be varying too much. So on an economic basis, what we really want to do is make sure that this is adoptable, and financing that is very much part of the equation. Therefore, the cheap behind the green hydrogen.
Thank you, Tulika. So, okay, sir, But before I take your question, I just wanted to do a little bit recap of the time that we have with us. We would probably be able to take just one more question after you. That's the maximum, because I do intend to give the panelists about a minute each, at least, to them for some final thoughts. And then I just intend to do a very quick summing up of the key takeaways of this session. So if we could have you.
Yeah, this is Lakshminarayan here. Basically, my question is to Mr. Marcus. Just wanted to know, like, since you are dealing with India already and various states over there and dealing with water sustainability, and just now you are mentioning about to that gentleman about the cost factor. Is there any market in India for desalination, at least by the government?
Yes.
So if it is not
Yes.
cost effective, can they afford to do that, or how that can be turned around?
Yeah, okay. So desalination is the most expensive source of water, generally, right? You don't do desalination unless you have no other choices, right? At the typical selling prices of water in most Indian municipals, it's actually not economical to have desalination water, but we are seeing actually a lot of desalination projects coming up, especially around in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, where it's just municipal is not able to supply water. So the industries in particular would have to go to desalination just to be able to have water for their operational needs.
Specifically, if somebody wants to have a fab, what they need is, the pure water and power. If these two are not committed, you can't have a fab in a country, Yep. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, especially if you are going to attract high-end manufacturing, including semiconductors, a lot of water and good quality water is needed, right? So in fact, from Singapore's experience, we first developed the new water system, recycle water at the municipal level, mainly to cater to the semiconductor factories.
Thank you. And maybe in that case, any last questions from anybody? If no, then I'll just ask the panelists to take about a minute each on what you think with respect to the main subject that we had today in this session, the next stage of collaboration between India and Singapore. And we had 3 themes for covering this. So with respect to your theme, if you would want to just say some, what do you think are the must-dos, essential challenges, best steps forward? So let me start from my right now. Harsh?
No, thank you. I think I would just like to say, as I already mentioned, that in the area of food security, not only for Singapore, even for India in many respects, or any other country, I would say food security is the #1 priority for everyone. So, and food cooperation is a key element, but as I think Muthu also mentioned earlier, we can't have a myopic view of just trade, because trade then can happen at any prices. It's more about holistically looking at trade, investments into each other's areas, as well as collaborating on science, as well as enabled by policy. And also, as I mentioned, that on all those 4 aspects, large institutions as well as policymakers, including investment firms like us, are doing our bit. And there's a lot to be done more. And I think, as I mentioned also, that Singapore, I hope, like it participated in the large Chinese growth story, would be able to participate well and beyond in the next 2 decades of India's growth story.
Thank you. Muthu?
The quick one, I had talked about quid pro quo or give and take. One is on a bilateral basis, but more importantly, what I see is that the countries have to take a more holistic view in terms of ensuring food security and not at a cost, not seeing that as a cost, but as an investment for securing their food future. So if that mind shift change happens, the affluent countries or the countries who can afford will probably have a better sense of cooperation with the countries that have the capacity to produce, but do not have the ability to produce. So that will create a different level of cooperation and trust that possibly will transcend, and it is my hope, transcend geopolitical tensions and regulatory interventions which can be politically motivated. So because once the countries are heavily invested between affluent and needy countries. I think a lot of policy formulation will be shaped based on that kind of connect and trust. So that would be my hope.
Thank you so much for that. Marcus? So I see a lot of potential and a lot of common interest between Singapore and India in environmental sustainability. On the one hand, there is technologies and capital sitting in Singapore looking for markets and investment destination. And this is where India can provide, and that's where also India needs, attract capital and having the right solutions. And on the other hand, issues and problems adapting to climate change where both countries face, and that is when both countries can come together and co-create solutions for the future. Thank you. Tulika?
I think in short, we look forward to unlocking the next frontier of energy transition and environmental sustainability and decarbonization by partnering with our Indian collaborators to bring a disruptive technology for cheap green hydrogen production from Singapore.
Thank you. Guru?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, the technology is very fast changing, and we have significant amount of skills and shortage of skills in many areas, and then AI and digitalization are perhaps two key aspects which will help us to address the needs, because as Marcus also mentioned, there are many needs of these two economies are quite common, and I must say that digitalization and AI are two main pillars that will help us to address some of their common needs and the mutual benefits.
Yeah, I think there is tremendous potential between India and Singapore for cooperation, and I think primarily through flow and exchange of ideas, people, and data, and especially with respect to AI and digitalization. I think, and in computer science, we have a very maverick culture of doing open source and doing everything for a public good and all that. I think that facilitates these exchanges a lot. And I'm personally very excited about the potential of technology and AI in particular. And I just would try to remind people that when the web started, it was a lone physicist sitting in CERN thinking of physicists exchanging their research papers, and then the HTTPS protocol was designed. It was not imagined at that time that that particular protocol would eventually lead to the World Wide Web, the Uber, the Zomato, Swiggy, Grab, Instagram, all these kind of good and bad things coming out. So I think we are only at the very beginning of this very data-driven kind of an AI revolution. And I think I'm very excited what the future will bring. Though, of course, there are some causes of apprehension, misinformation, disinformation, and all that. I think we need to kind of be responsible about it. But I think overall, I think the future looks good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you, all the panelists. Let me just try to bring in a little bit of the big picture understanding across these three sectors. I think one note of very clear understanding is the enthusiasm and the optimism that all of you have shared insofar as going forward into the next phase of collaboration is concerned, which I think is remarkable because, Singapore, of course, is a very different example, but since we also look at India and its relationships with a large number of other countries, I think Singapore is truly exceptional in that respect, that this is a bilateral relationship where there is an enormous amount of hope. There is promise. There was always promise. It has been realized, but now in these very specific areas, the new generation areas of collaboration, there is a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. Now, having said that, I think from all that you respectively shared, I think one learning becomes very clear, that there are clearly area-specific, sector-specific, industry-specific challenges, some of which is very unique, like what Muthu and Harsh mentioned with respect to food, what Tulika alluded to in the area of green hydrogen, and the ones that Guru and Mohan mentioned. It's interesting that I think what we also note from your respective experiences, that there are a lot of exchanges that are going on across various groups. For example, B2B, there's a lot of conversation that is taking place. We are aware of what is going on between governments at the G2G level. We are aware of what is happening between academic institutions. What I'm not totally sure about is whether these groups are engaging with other groups. We see a lot of intra-group engagement. But whether there is inter-group engagement to the extent that is necessary for picking up the collaboration and taking it to the next level is something that we probably need to reflect on. And I think this is precisely what, something that Mohan mentioned, that there is that promise, there is that excitement. But there are areas where probably one particular group of stakeholder can only contribute up to a maximum level. Like what Mohan is doing in his space, or what Guru is doing, or what Marcus is doing, can only be confined up to that threshold. Beyond that, when it particularly comes to regulations, when it comes to operability, there are far more serious challenges and ideas to be taken forward. And I think we all hope, you will join me in that hope, that we have had very significant exchanges between the two countries in recent months and years, particularly after COVID, and we do hope that the next phase of collaboration will actually really open the doors in this cross-stakeholder conversations and learnings. So with that, panelists, I first need to thank you individually for being an extremely disciplined group insofar as time is concerned. I never ever had to look at you from the corner of my eyes to curb you in your words and expressions. Thank you so much for being... I was looking at you. With a lot of kindness. Thank you so much. It's not always that we, as a moderator, get an opportunity to disclose this. Thank you so much. And I really would also want to thank you for sparing your time. It's a busy working day. Too many commitments, I know, on part of all of you. So on behalf of ISAs, the Singapore-India Partnership Foundation, let me thank you for being a part of this panel, and extremely enlightened, engaging audience. Thank you for sticking on after the lunch. It's not easy. And thank you for getting across to the panelists with your very, very rich queries. Thank you, everybody. So please join me in giving a big hand to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palit and the panelists for this candid and engaging session. With that, we come to the end of the inaugural Singapore-India Forum. We hope you had an insightful day. On behalf of the Singapore-India Partnership Foundation, Institute of South Asian Studies, and the Singapore Business Forum, we thank you for your continued support.